What would make raising money easier? What would make selling my product easier? What would have people bring me deals more? And that was a TV show. And so I started to get really intentional around the content that I was putting out on social media.
Good morning on the West Coast. Good afternoon on the East Coast. It's Joe Herrera from fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada. Stoked to be here with my guy, Paul Mielke. He's an A&E star, flipping down south. He's moving properties. He's got some of the greatest hair in the business.
That's my greatest accolade.
Yeah, it looks awesome, man. Well, thanks for hopping on with us. So you and I were kind of chatting before we went live, but just to kind of catch people up, like, how did this happen? Because everybody's like, I want to be the next Chip and Joanna Gaines. I want to be the next Property Brothers. I want to be the next flipping down south. Like, so talk a little bit about your entry into the real estate industry and how on earth did you find yourself starring on a TV show?
Yeah, so I've been in the industry about 6 years now. I was, up until then, I was a serial entrepreneur and had done a lot of different things, everything from food trucks to t-shirt companies to owning a gym. And eventually I found myself working at a bar, and I had worked my way up to being the general manager. One night, into the night, I'm paying everybody out. I'm like 23, 24 years old. I'm having like the best time though, right? And I look around, everybody's a little bit older and life has kind of beat them up a little bit. And I'm like, had one of those like real sobering moments where I was like, oh, this is a trap, huh? And so I decided to do what like everybody who doesn't really know what they want to do with their life does. And I signed up for real estate school.
Yeah. Exactly.
So yeah, I got into real estate school. I ended up taking a job in property management, which I didn't really understand. Of course, they told me, hey, you can do this job from your phone. Like it's not an office job. And within 2 weeks of being at it, they're like, hey, you have to be in the office from 9 to 5. And it ended up being not what I expected it. So I was managing like 150 single family properties. Everything. I'm talking about leasing, paying homeowners, showing doing repairs, overseeing repairs. But it ended up being a really big blessing for me because I learned more about real estate in that first year than I think a lot of people learn in their first 5 or 6 years, because I was just doing the whole thing. And I also sold 23 homes my first year, which I think was okay. I feel like if I would have been doing real estate full time instead of property management full time and showing houses at night, that I could have done a little bit more than that. But after the first year kind of clicked over, I was in the Montgomery market. And you got to remember, this is 6 years ago. We're in a climbing market, and in my market, average days on market was still around 85, 90 days. So the market wasn't exactly booming. So I packed up my stuff, moved to Birmingham, decided Birmingham was a growing market that I wanted to be a part of. Did that really quickly. Got me and my broker started bumping heads. We bumped heads one time, and I moved up here the next day. So they won't lease you an apartment your first day, apparently. So I slept in the parking lot. Next morning, I got the keys, moved in, and then I showed up to the brokerage the next morning and was like, hey, let's sell some real estate. And I remember thinking on my way to the brokerage, I had to put it in the GPS. And I remember being like, oh, well, that's not good. I don't even know how to get to my brokerage, and I'm supposed to be selling houses. And then I had to go get food, and I had to put that in the GPS. And I realized that, it was going to be a real uphill battle. So
let's talk about that for a second. So a couple of things you said really resonated with me. I've been obsessed with the barrier of entry into real estate is so low, right? Mm-hmm. Every entrepreneur at some point goes like, all right, I remember I got my real estate license. I was selling a product called High Loft. It was an overhead garage storage system. So I got my real estate license. I was 21 years old. Then I got recruited to sell this construction, like this garage storage system. And I showed up at a guy's house. We had some mutual friends. He owned a home builder, or he was a home builder. And he said to me, you're a pretty good salesperson. You have your real estate license. Why are you selling $100 garage overhead system when you could be selling, at the time, a $250,000 house and making, $7,000? Yeah. So as an entrepreneur, every entrepreneur gets into real estate, but because the barrier of entry is so low, the barrier of success is so high. But I don't think most people go through what you went through, which at the time you may not have been able to recognize it for what it was. But now you're able to look back and go I'm so grateful. Real estate is one of the very few industries where you can earn while you learn. Right. So you found yourself in a property management situation. You sold some houses, but now looking back, you're like, man, I'm so glad I did that because I learned. So in your experience, like, obviously you're grateful for it, but what do you think? I mean, diagnose it for me a little bit. Why are most real estate entrepreneurs so so focused on, like, I want to be top producer day one, that they never slow themselves down enough to go like, you know what, I'm going to grind on this property management thing for a year or so. I'm going to sell some houses. I'm going to learn while I earn. Have you been able to figure that one out?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people just aren't learning based, and they don't understand that they can't, that your business is only going to grow to the extent of your knowledge and to the extent of how well you perform as a human being. And so the first thing to do for me is always to grow that, right? And then I can fill that up with business. But a lot of people kind of do it the opposite way, and they think that they're just going to show up and they won't have to put in the work, and like people are going to come to them and all of a sudden they're just going to have this business. And that's just not life. Why would somebody trust you with the biggest investment of their life when you don't know anything? And I think that's something that I know NAR has some stuff out that they're going to try to make it a lot harder to be a realtor in the next couple of years. I'll be interested to see if that really happens or not. But I mean, I think that we failed as an industry in a lot of places, and that starts from the top down, because not everybody is like me or like you. I know a lot of people that get in this business, and because they have that designation, people assume that the work has already been put in when it hasn't. So
it's true.
Yeah, I also think that you should treat the first 2 years of you doing anything like an internship. And the money just shouldn't be that important, because you can't learn anything in less than 2 years. You can't be good at anything in less than 2 years. I just don't believe that.
Well, and that's why I think I believe that real estate is the greatest entrepreneurial economy, or like the greatest system for hyper entrepreneurship, because the reality is, while the barrier of entry is low, the success is so high. So I've kind of geeked out on this a little bit. Like, I've got buddies and friends who are dentists or whatever, and it's like the barrier of entry is so high, they've got to go to dental school for 8 years, or college and then dental school. So then when they come out, it's like the floor is $100,000 a year. The ceiling is $400,000 a year. Yeah. In real estate, the floor is literally zero. There's half the real estate agents in America make zero. Yeah. And then the ceiling is $7-8 million. I mean, I know licensed real estate professionals that are making $7-8 million a year, not necessarily opening doors, but in this industry. So that's what I love so much, is the barrier of entry is low, but the barrier of success is high. So now you're done with your education process. You're at a new office, kind of, you had to GPS yourself there, kind of take it from there.
Yeah, so I sold no homes my first 5 months. Actually, I think I sold one home. It was an op city lead. By the time the op city lead and the team split came out of it, and my brokerage split came out of it, I made like $176, awesome. Which was heartbreaking, honestly. But we got to the end of it. We got it closed. Of course, that was one of the hardest transactions I've done. But the last 7 months of the year, I ended up selling like 35 homes, started to get my feet really settled. And then the next year, I ended up selling like 76 homes. So, and
this is in Alabama. Yeah,
this is in Birmingham, Alabama.
Okay.
So my average price point was probably around 130, 140, which is still kind of on the bottom end of what Birmingham did, but you couldn't tell me anything after that second year. Like, we started to really figure things out. And the way that I was able to build my business, because I had that property management background, well, I showed up here and I had no sphere. I didn't know anybody here. And so I worked the leads that nobody else wanted to work, which was always investors. But I understood how investment real estate worked because I had this background in property management. So while most people were calling their friends and family to buy and sell real estate, I was driving around Birmingham and I was looking for houses that looked like they needed some work. And then I was reverse prospecting the owner. I'd call the owner. I'd say, hey, have you ever considered selling this house? I know it looks like nobody's lived there in a long time. Almost always they would say yes. This was back before everybody was a wholesaler and everybody was investing in real estate. I was like the first call that they had gotten, right? And they're like, yeah, of course I would. And then I would bring in a contractor. I'd get a quote on what it was going to take to get that property rent ready, and I'd package those things together with a rental rate that I thought it would rent for, and I'd go shop it to these investors that nobody else wanted to work with. They were from California, they were from all over the place, where buying $100,000 home in Birmingham that rents for $1,000, like that was a deal that was unheard of. And sometimes we got a lot better deals than that. Those deals are gone now in Birmingham, but I remember buying stuff for like 60 grand that would rent for like $1,200, and just now knowing what I know now, I wish I would have bought 100 of those, but that's not how it worked out. But that's how I built my whole business. And from there, I started to make relationships, and those relationships started to turn into normal house sales. And then those relationships also started turning into project management opportunities. And then those project management opportunities started to turn into partnership opportunities. And it doesn't take long, if you have any kind of like ambition, to look up at the end of a deal and see on the HUD or the Alta and see that the investor's making like 60 grand. And you're like, wait a minute, I found the deal. I brought the contractor, I designed the product, and I sold it. So this 3% and 10% management fee doesn't seem as cool as I thought it would. So that's when we started to get into the world of trying to figure out this banking situation. And I'm not from a very financially literate background, so that took a little bit of time too. But once we started to figure that out, I ended up leaving the team I was on, forming a new team with my at the time business partner, and I looked at the landscape of things, and I said, hey, if I wanted to start with the end in mind and I wanted to pour rocket fuel on what I'm doing now, this was me coming off of reading Infinite Game and Rocket Fuel and a couple other books that really had a heavy influence.
Not how and all the tax-free wealth.
The standards, like the Bible of investment, right? And exactly. So I was reading all these books, and I was like, well, what would make raising money easier? What would make selling my product easier? What would have people bring me deals more? And that was a TV show. And so I started to get really intentional around the content that I was putting out on social media. And I stopped because my business wasn't very sphere based. I didn't really worry about my sphere. You know what I mean? Right. And I started putting out a product that a TV show would be interested in picking up. And from there, I started asking people who had TV shows questions, people I knew in the film industry. I started asking them questions. So finally, when that first message slid into my inbox, it was a lady from Water Cooler Casting. She asked a bunch of questions. Would you be interested in hopping on the phone? I was like, yeah, absolutely. But those first 4 or 5 interviews, like I knew the questions that were going to be asked. And I remember hanging up the phone just being like, dude, we rocked that interview. You know what I mean? Because I knew. Yeah. And I knew what they were going to ask. I knew what they wanted. I had bios prepared on the whole team. I had before and after pictures in a Google Drive. So we were just really ready for that opportunity when it showed up. And then
talk about this for a second, because I want to unpack something you just said. So I went through a process about 2 years ago. There was a documentary on Netflix called The Social Dilemma.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen it. Okay. So I watched it and I was like, this makes me kind of sick, right? Like I saw what the social media companies were doing. I bought it. I understood it. And then I was like, so there was that moment of like, forget this. I'm going to delete all my social media. Mm-hmm. And then right before I hit delete, I was like, wait a minute. What if rather than letting them dictate my life and basically either like playing the game or opting out, I was like, what if I decide I'm going to use social media? Like I'm going to flip the script on them. And so what I love so much is that you said, I started purposely putting out content that I knew the type of person I was trying to attract, which at the time was media companies. Mm-hmm. I'm going to try to get a TV show by leveraging my social. So you've had tons of conversations, I'm sure mentorship conversations with agents. Walk through that process for me really quick mentally to say like, I'm not going to let them use me. I'm going to use them. Like how hard was that to figure out? Because I think that's something every real estate entrepreneur should be doing, is saying, forget this. I'm not going to let social dictate me. I'm going to use social to reach my target audience.
Yeah. So I think the most important thing is to start with the end in mind. So for me, that was the TV show, right? But for somebody else, they might be a buyer-based business. So it might be, they might be looking for buyers, or I know people whose whole business is built around rentals. And so they should start with finding that renter in mind. But I think that one of the biggest things that you can do is just tell your story. I believe that we live in stories inside of stories, and that's really important. So social media is just about storytelling and telling that story clearly and in a way that people want to interact with it, and they want to tie their story to your story. And I think that that's something that's really important. That's why testimonials are really important, because people want to tie their experience to other people's experience. And when you look at things experientially, that's what happens, right? So for me, I was telling the story of me driving around finding ran down homes for, at the time, like $6,000, $7,000.
Wow.
Those days are gone too. I know, like, people are going to slide in my box on social media and say, hey, sell me some of those $6,000 houses. Like, Birmingham has taken off since then, since 4 or 5 years ago when that was really a thing. But I told that story, and I think I told it really well. And then I was just super authentic. And because I wasn't worried about, I live a pretty uncompromising life. So when I don't worry about what people think about what I do, and I'm not willing to compromise on who I am in order just to sell some homes. And I think
so. I have a feeling. That. Yeah, I have a feeling I know where you're going to land on this one. Gary V, documentation over creation. Like, yeah, you're a document guy.
Yeah. Document it, like the good, the bad, the ugly, put it all up. You know what I mean? Like, people, like, authenticity is something that it doesn't, in a world where everything seems perfect all the time, authenticity and things not being perfect sometimes is totally okay. And it's okay to share that. It's okay to be vulnerable with people. But
talk about this though, because there's vulnerability. Mm-hmm. But there's such a thing as negative vulnerability and positive vulnerability, right? Like there's the guy that takes a picture looking depressed, looking unhappy, and like, man, my life freaking sucks. And then there's a picture of a guy looking not in shape, not in whatever, going like, man, I'm like, today was day one of my workout and I feel like crap, but I'm on the grind, right? Yeah. So it's the same thing. Both are vulnerable, but one is vulnerable towards positivity and one is vulnerable towards negativity. I mean, do you differentiate between those two?
Yeah, so I don't really have a lot of negative vulnerability in my life, you know, like it's always day one for me, and every day is a blessing and it has its own life. And I don't think about, I've kind of, like we talked about earlier, like everything's an internship. And if you take that mentality to things and you know that you're just moving forward and you're confident in what you're doing and who you are, then the world doesn't get to shake you. And that comes with having a good base. And then when you have that base, you can share things and not worry about what other people say, because that's all things to just bounce off when you know who you are. People come and go, and you and what you're doing and your mission and the business you're building and your family, like that's the stuff that you take day to day and you take into the next day. So all the other stuff doesn't matter.
So I keep notes on my phone of Reels ideas, because I'm always looking to create content, and I put down here positive vulnerability, because I've never thought of it that way, right? Like people want to know honest, they want to see authentic, but so much of the media and the news and everything is so negative. It's like you can be vulnerable and admit you're not the greatest thing ever while being positive about growth, and I think that that's probably highly attractive.
Yeah, like I can tell you right now. So one of the things that I'm focusing on, that I'm going to start telling the story more of on my social media, is that, like, as we flip houses, I would say 80% of the people who buy our houses just have a phenomenal experience. And we're flipping 100-year-old homes. And then there's the other 20% who, you know, like something goes wrong after closing, or like, you know, they just weren't really prepared to buy an old home, or something like that happens. Repairs don't get done, and then we have to push closing 3 or 4 days. And so my focus in 2023 is eliminating that 20%. But the only way I can eliminate that 20% of bad experiences, or not super positive experiences is probably a better way to say it, is by talking about it, and talking about it with everybody, and figuring out how we eliminate the things that create those. So if you're not willing to be vulnerability is something too, where it's necessary for growth, because you have to admit, hey, I came up short. You know, and we come up short every day here. You know what I mean? But what we do is we come up short and we say, okay, well, that was weird. How can we fix that? And then if the same things, you know, if you're truly honest with yourself and you notice yourself coming up short on the same things over and over again, those are the things that need to move to the top of the priority list as far as things that need to get fixed. And that's something that is a constant struggle around here, is trying to attack those things. And then you think you have it fixed, and then it happens again. You're like, well, I didn't see that coming. But that's why I love real estate too, for the same reason that I love it, that it's different every day. and it's exciting and it holds my attention because there's so many different variables, is the same reason that it's almost impossible to totally master, which makes it something that can be a lifelong passion and a lifelong craft that you work on. It's not black and white, you know?
Well, and I think about this in the having owned a couple of brokerages, interviewed thousands of agents, and seeing like an older generation of agent come into our office and say, hey, I really need help. My calendar game used to be on point. I used to be able to like roll out the Crimson Tide, like football schedule. And then people would put it on their fridge and they would just call me. And they're like, I don't know what happened, but no one calls me anymore. And so there is that point of vulnerability for them. And I love it because they're willing to learn and they're willing to grow. So walk us through this now. You go through, you pitch a couple of different, is it networks or talent scouts, or how does that work?
Yeah. So, all the major networks are a little bit different in how they operate, but A&E owns a production company, and that production company went out and found and hired talent agencies to essentially go out and get talent. So the talent agency, we ran through a bunch of stuff, and then they call us one day and they're like, hey, you don't have a TV show yet, but I just want to let you know what a big deal this is. You're officially going to be dealing with the network from now on. So essentially they were paid to bring like X amount of people in, they got paid, and then they stepped out. And then we start getting emails from people with like @aenetworks.com. And I'm like, oh man, this is getting really cool. And then this is during COVID, right? So I think this is about to loop right back to that content creation piece we were talking about earlier. They could not send somebody out to do pilots. So we made it into like the last, 16, 17 shows, and they were supposed to do pilots for all of them. But because of COVID, they weren't able to do that. So they called us at like 4:00 on like a Tuesday. They were like, hey, Paul, they had me open my phone, change all my settings on my video camera. They were like, now just have somebody follow you around tomorrow from the time you start working to the time you finish working. And we need the footage by 9:00. We're going to have somebody edit it together. The network heads are coming together. They're going to pick the top 2 or 3 out of this final group. And then we're going to green light a show. And we were like, okay, cool. So I hang up the phone with them. I'm like, well, the last thing I'm doing is not sending in a real pilot. So I started, because I know this is.
So you're like, I'm not going to do this on my phone. I'm not going to go cheap on this. I'm actually going to put some,
If we're talking about telling a story, I'm not going to let my story be told after all this work and everything I've worked for from a little iPhone that somebody just follows me around with. Like that's not what's going to happen when you're faced with massive opportunity. Like you have to take advantage of it. So I'm calling video companies left and right. I'm calling them. Everybody's like, yeah, we could do it. I'm pretty much telling them, you got a blank check. What would it take for you to show up tomorrow? And everybody's like 3 weeks out, 2 weeks out, like 4 days out. But luckily we had a girl on the team, and her little sister was in high school, but was taking a video class. And so I called her. I said, hey, I'll give you $300 to come shoot for the day. She was like, okay. She checked the equipment out of school. Like she went back up to the school, checked it out. Played hooky the next day. Her parents greenlit it. She shot my life for a whole day. It was a super authentic day. I fell through a window that day, smashed my phone. None of it was made up. I think that really came through. And we edited the footage till like 3 a.m. I shared it. Next thing you know, I get a phone call. It's like, hey, are y'all all together? And the last thing that the talent scout had told us was, you'll always get bad news by email. And if they ever call you and ask if you're all together, you're about to get really good news. So luckily we were all together. We, or 2 of us were, we beeped in the third partner, and we got a show, and it was all real feel good. And it was great. It was one of the, when my life flashes before my eyes one day, that is one of the moments that will be there that I'll be like, wow, like that was just such a solid moment to sit in, because I think the curse of ambition, right, is you set these goals, and then by the time you get to them, they don't feel like goals anymore because you've already put your eyes on the next goal. But we did I think that something that I generally do a poor job of, but I did a really good job of then, was sitting in that moment and enjoying it, because it was pretty awesome. We all were pumped.
Yeah. And you think about it, like, so somebody will ask me every once in a while, like, hey, what should I do for video content creation? And I'm always especially, the 40 and older crowd. I'm 43, but you get like 55-year-old realtors going like, hey, I want to get better at content creation. And I'm like, I dig it. And they're like, what's my next step? And I was like, your next step is to talk to your kids or grandkids and say, hey, do you have a friend that makes TikTok videos or YouTube? If so, hire that kid, because when I got into the industry in 01, it was professional production was the only option. Professional design was the only option. We had billboards, radio commercials, TV stuff. And when we did it, it was like, there were just these crews. There was like 5 or 6 people in a city that could either do the design or the production of what you want. And we're now in this world where you film a pilot with an 11th grader or whatever that has to check out the video equipment from her high school to film your pilot. You cut it, edit it yourself with them. You send it to A&E and they greenlight a show. Like that is evidence of the greatest economy we've ever been in. And
agreed.
And people just have to plug in. Am I right?
That's right. And fame, you have to understand now that fame is not what it used to be, right? So it's accessible to everybody. And that's something like you don't have to be a made man by a production company or by somebody else. You can go do things on your own. And so while we might never have another Elvis or the Beatles or somebody like that who like the whole world obsesses over and they're able to do those kind of numbers, everybody has the opportunity to establish a decent sized platform and figure out how to leverage that to change the trajectory of their family's lives. And I think that's something that everybody needs to understand is that like, hey, you got just as good of a shot as anybody else. The data on how all these algorithms work is out there. The success plan is out there. Now it's just on you to take accountability for creating the stuff that will make you successful. And success is relative. It looks different to different people. So, you know, for some people, success looks like, hey, I'm going to use my social media to sell an extra 5 homes this year. And that's worth their time. And to other people, that looks like having a national television show. But for me, I'm just enjoying the journey. And, you know, I like setting these big goals and then going and trying to chase them down because adventure is something that I crave in my life on a daily basis. Like I am constantly seeking the next adventure. And for me, that was it, you know, and now we have another TV show coming out. So I always say that 1 show is a fluke and 2 is enough where nobody can ever say that I got lucky. And then, so that's really exciting. And after that, I don't know what the next adventure will be. But hopefully it's whatever it is, it helps change the people that I'm bringing with me's lives too. So the team's lives, the administrators' lives, and then anybody else that I can drag along with me, because that's what life is really about at the end of the day.
So I love it. I think we've got a little bit of a glimpse into the future. I know you're working on some big stuff. Maybe give us a couple of takeaways. Like, what did you learn? Everybody, it's funny because we've done the house hunters. We've done some of that stuff. And it's always like, man, you know, like you look at what Chip and Joanna do. We know they have the home under contract. They then find a couple of properties that let them come in and pretend like they are considering buying it and all this fun stuff, right? Like, so it's like, it's real, but it's not real. Like, Chip will run in, knock down a couple of walls, and then he bounces and his crew does the whole thing, right? Yeah. So, like, what were some of your takeaways from having filmed a show, seeing what you shoot, seeing what shows up on the actual production? Like, what are some of your key takeaways that people may not know about having a TV show?
Yeah, the first thing was that how intrusive it is into your life your first time around, because you don't understand what goes into a TV show until you do it. So like I tell people all the time, I'm like, you'll never talk bad about the Kardashians in front of me again, because I know what it's like to have a camera follow you around from 7 to 7, 5 days a week. Like it's a brutal job, and you have to treat it like a job. So this it's a job. Just that's what it is. And you have to show up, and you have to show up with your A game, and you have to show up for that job the same way you show up for your employees every day, the same way you show up for your clients every day. And you have to realize that nobody really cares what happened to you the night before. Like if you're having personal problems or anything like that, like you just got to show up and you got to show out every single time. So that would be one of my first takeaways. Second takeaway was probably that my business was not necessarily ready for something like that, because we had to scale rapidly. And so now we scaled to doing 10 homes at one time, right? And we were used to doing 3 or 4, and the opportunity came around and they were like, can you do 10 homes at once? And of course, without hesitation, the answer was yes. And then we had to figure it out afterwards. But I think one of the takeaways from that is that if you're not scared to embarrass yourself, then just get in the game, and then you can figure out the rules, Right. And so we got in the game, and now we've kind of figured out the rules of the game. We figured out the rules of scale, flipping houses at scale. We figured out how TV works. We figured out how to balance all those things together. But it was pretty brutal at first.
Yeah, I love it. Well, man, listen, I know you're doing big stuff. I appreciate you taking a little bit of time for us. How can people get in touch? I know Instagram is at Houses by Paul. Is that right?
Yeah. So all social media is at Houses by Paul. And if you just DM me there, I check those messages at least once a day. I'm also on Twitter. I'm not really big on the Facebook right now, but that's something I'm about to turn up. I really wanted to master one platform before I move to the next. And so I'm active on Instagram. I'm active on Twitter. I'm active on TikTok. And pretty soon that Facebook's about to be booming too. And same with YouTube.
I love it. Well, hey, man, listen, I appreciate your time. I appreciate your knowledge. I'm obsessed with collaboration, right? Like you and I just met each other, but you and I are going to do some stuff together. And I think that there's something to be, I love entrepreneurialism. I love meritocracy. Like the fact of the matter is the reason why you've gotten to where you've gotten is because you deserve it. Mm-hmm. Like you put in the work, you did the work before the work, as they say. And so I think there's something to be said there for individuals that also say like, man, pre-COVID, you didn't have a show. You flipped some houses. You were, 6 years ago, you were working at a bar. Yeah. So for somebody watching this, it's like, man, I've got an idea and I want to run with it. Like, I love your story because it's not, I was a failed actor and people pitched me on 7 different concepts. And so I ran with one of them. Yeah. You took your life, realized that people could learn and grow from it, and then brought people into your world via the television and now, crushing on social. So I appreciate you. I appreciate your willingness to share, and I look forward to big things.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I had a great time. We'll have to do it again soon.
Okay, thanks, buddy.
Absolutely. Talk to you soon.